hand over to Koos. Koos is one of the OTC directors. You've seen him last month in the webinar presenting, and he will facilitate this Q&A for you. With that, thank you, Koos.
Thank you, Wilmien. Yeah, the panel is the three speakers, but then also Freek. The panel and Freek can just switch on their cameras. The webinar goes a lot around pricing. And if we think about currently the South African gas price, say it's in the order of $7 per gigajoule, and then we have potentially all the sources that it comes from. And I'm basically combining quite a few of the questions around this topic. And it's a question to the whole panel, but we will see who's jumping in. Freek, you can also switch that. Yeah. I mean, the options, in a sense, is from a gas point of view, is bringing in gas from imported gas in a bulk scenario, or maybe in an ISO scenario, or then actually explore the onshore gas or the offshore gas. And then there's also, with Anton in a question here, is around the shale gas. Now, the issue is gas prices are really achievable, and where must be the focus be between all of these issues to play? Maybe, Jaco, you can maybe just have an introduction further around this. You've talked about bringing it in from imports, but balancing it with other sources. What's your views around it?
First, apologies. I just missed that the second last or the third last sentence.
That's the balance relative to bringing it in imported versus all the local sources.
Correct. So it is important to note that we first need to secure supply. All right, that is absolutely critical. Unfortunately, in the South African context, if we, especially and we lay this at the door of the government in terms of taking leadership in this respect, but if we had picked up gas exploration in all its seriousness and potential 10-15 years ago, we would not have faced this position that we are in today. So we are compelled to transition to LNG before we will transition to domestic gas. At least that would be the desired outcome. The cost differential really sits in the fact that LNG prices is largely determined by those demand and market conditions where the demand is concentrated globally, and that is Asia and Europe. Now, clearly, there's a different set of economics that apply in Asia for gas than in South Africa. We are price takers. We cannot set price. Our volumes are way too small to play a significant role in gas markets globally. So the differentials really come in with regards to, number one, what is the on the demand side, what is the market price set with that? And of course, those particular market and dynamics that apply in those parts of the world. There are, particularly if you consider Henry Hub, there's a differential there which is largely fixed in nature. These are shipping and liquefaction costs and these kind of things. So you see then a gas price landed at about $12 to $13. We see it as low as $10.50 actually at the moment in South Africa. It is interesting to note that the IRP references $15 gas as a proxy, which in our opinion is way too expensive for the South African economy. We don't have an LNG market at those price levels. So we believe that if you have domestic gas capacity or the differential there and sit simply in the midstream infrastructure costs. So again, if the rough modeling that we've performed on this, in, for example, bringing a pipeline in from the West Coast to Sasolburg, for example, roughly about $3 to $4 billion in cost. And then, of course, you need probably about a 200 petajoule demand to make things, to bring that tariff to the $3-4 range. All right. So then you can have a route to market. then you've got to consider the upstream production cost of that domestic gas. We believe, particularly on the West Coast play, there's a potential, and I'm talking here West Coast specifically. It's the cost of the production, the opportunity cost of that gas, which could probably then result in a $7 or $8 landed cost, for gas in Sasolburg. Of course, there are other dynamics. Each and every resource has got its own dynamics. We take particular notice of the smaller scale producers in South Africa, which has got a different set of economics and pricing. So it is important to acknowledge and understand what risks and costs, scale, and investments are going into these particular resources. So it is not a single rule for each domestic resource of gas. We certainly don't expect and acknowledge that there are differences. But LNG is a completely different set of economics, driven by a whole different set of market conditions. Like we said, those are gas on gas type competitive pricing that drives LNG pricing, where domestic gas exploitation will more be based on cost of gas, and the return on the capital and the risk associated with those developments. I hope that answers.
Yeah, that helps. I can see you're very careful not to move too much in the comparison between the prices. But Freek, maybe from your side, we've now yet we can maybe land at 12. I don't know what it will be at Gauteng. That is we bringing LNG, but also if we develop our own offshore, it's maybe 7. But what about the onshore side, Freek? Maybe you can jump in there to add a bit of context to the comparison.
Yeah. Thanks, Koos. Yeah, our work is mainly centered around, as we said in the previous conversations, developing of some of these inland gas resources, especially around Gauteng, Botswana, and maybe Mozambique and so on. And I think that was sort of the reference from Andries's discussion also. Now, the issue is that we are, doing a bit of work and doing a bit of exploration work and so on at the moment. And so let's say, as Andries said, we can produce gas at the well field at $7 or $8 or $9, something of that order. You have to add somewhere between $4 and $7 to $8 to that, whether you produce it as gas and sell it or liquefy it. And what Andries mentioned is that we would like to get the price down to, say, $3 or $4 or something like that in the gas field. The issue really is, and I think Jaco mentioned it also, that we really have to do this at scale now and tackle it with a vengeance. And in a way, because we are a bit late, I think, as Jaco said, we have to rely on bringing LNG in if we can make that work. But if everybody sort of put together a concerted effort and start doing the inland gas at scale, then I think we can get towards the maybe $4 or $5 of gas, and that's really where we want to be. But I think, Koos, it requires quite a bit of concentrated and coordinated effort to really achieve that sort of level of engagement and confidence in developing the South African inland gas. And I think in yesterday's webinar from Kremer Engineering News, it was said there is enough market for all the players that are busy developing or working in this gas field area now, the local resource developments. So there's no reason to sort of compete against one another. I think if we can all sort of pull together, we can really get something going here.
Well, thank you. Andries, anything to add? Yours. Unmute, please.
Sorry, so I'm unmuting. No, was not specifically, perhaps just that to emphasize the conceited joint effort, and it's not competing one against the other. I have to echo what Jaco has said. This interim window of bringing LNG into South Africa, landing it either in bulk or in ISO form, does put the South African economy under strain, and certain of the customers which we are seeing from an OTC point of view, and there I distinguish between large and small customers, are certainly facing a bit of a dilemma in terms of how they could keep their doors open. So yes, just to not regurgitate it, but really confirm both what Jaco and Freek has said, and hopefully, and I must say it might be wishful thinking, and hopefully not as well, that we would see more, what's the right word, action or participation from a regulatory or a governmental point of view. And Jaco might have better insights in terms of how that is moving forward. I think, Jaco, you mentioned it slightly. We certainly are not close enough to that to venture a specific view. But yes, it is of concern that we're not seeing that and that we are late out of the blocks.
Thank you, Andrisa. Introducing the next set of questions is really the enabling environment. And first of all, is the onshore work is basically done by new developing companies. Some of them actually is on the stock exchange in Australia to raise a bit of development company, and they're moving very slow. So there's definitely a shortage of money to do these things from the people who want to, but also, what is the government's role in this? And you've touched on that, and there's quite a few questions around this. So how are we going to create this enabling that there's correct government framework, and then also the financial backing to do this from government or the government supporting industries or the real financiers? The question is, maybe again, Jaco, you first.
Yeah, so of course, you know, this is a really a topical issue right now, as we at a point of starting to scratch the surface of what does this fiscal framework need to look like. Now, if you ask me today, we actually don't sit, we're not sitting, and maybe just a correction to your point earlier on, I don't think there's a shortage of money. In fact, there's money waiting to be spent, but the money will only flow where it's secure. All right. So therein lies the trick. I think the issue here that we face in South Africa is not an upstream investment issue. It is not a downstream investment issue. In other words, on the demand side, I honestly believe we're sitting with a midstream problem in South Africa. In other words, how do you connect supply and demand? If we can crack that nut at a transactional or fiscal level, how do we enable midstream infrastructure? If you start talking interconnecting pipelines, terminals, all right, this is really what we need to focus on. Without a doubt, we see the demand there. We understand the economics of gas. Domestic gas, you know, the potential and the economic set around domestic gas is where the country has to go to, and it has to land there ultimately on domestic gas. Investment upstream, usually, I mean, if you consider it, what is happening on the West Coast at the moment, there's billions and billions of dollars flowing into exploration, and it's all private capital, but in the context of global markets, not this market. All right. If it was only on this market, those investments wouldn't have taken place. So the upstream part, exploration side on domestic, whether it's onshore or offshore, I think is well catered for. The demand side is there. We understand the pricing. The pricing is tough initially, but we understand the long-term picture. So what is missing is who takes the risk in the middle, and how do we facilitate this? And that is where the government is failing at the moment. The private sector can only bring to the party so much, and it's not going to be able to underwrite all the infrastructure and all the pipelines required. We simply need the guarantee or the downside volume. It's essentially an insurance policy for the lenders and the developers. The rest can commercially be catered for. All right. So for us, I mean, what we see is really a midstream. It's connecting supply and demand. It's that little piece which will unlock everything upstream and everything downstream for us on the back of private capital.
But it's been, and maybe Freek, it's been small-scale LNG, not a real focus area in the interim, because at least we can move the molecules from point A to B. We've seen from Andries that obviously add a lot of price. But Freek, your comments around that? Unmute, please.
Unmute. We really see small-scale LNG is sort of a way to ramp up local production in an affordable way rather than having to build a million-ton-a-year type of facility and so on. I think it is affordable. The problem, I think, in what we're seeing, and as Jaco is also mentioning, in various areas there is quite a bit of exploration happening and well drilling happening to actually prove the resources. And as you mentioned, Koos, the companies are sort of small companies. It's not like the offshore exploration done by Shell and BP and all these big guys. And even there, they all work together on a field. Now, not like a single guy trying to do one thing by themselves. Just the thought occurred to me now. The problem is to get that money together actually to develop that midstream part, to take the gas from the whole thing from exploration thing into a production facility. And the one area which I see also a bit of difficulty is getting the investment and proving to the investors, especially the banks, that the field will be productive. Before you cannot show the actual productivity of the wells and so on and reduce that risk, it's difficult to get banks to invest. So in the past, you used to just flare the gas and prove that the gas goes, but that's not so, it's more frowned upon these days. So the idea is to put up a small facility that can actually you can start gas wells flowing and prove the productivity and to sort of do the necessary risk reduction so that you can get bigger financial institutions starting to invest. But pulling this all together is not always so easy. But of course, you can also elaborate on this. You've been looking at this quite a bit, so maybe your insight also.
Yeah, thank you, Freek. I want to move this question a little bit forward, and Aditya from Polartec in India said, but it's the mix of pipes and small-scale LNG not the solution, and then maybe just don't have to spend all the money on putting in new pipes. Why? I still think it is a shortage of money, but it's maybe a shortage of actually channeling the money. Andries, your views of it, maybe on the combination? We've done a lot of work for a client on that side.
No, of course, I don't have a specific view. I suppose and I apologize for that. I'm grappling with another question, so I might derail and not answer your question.
That's fine.
The question I have, and it possibly is more also again to Jaco and I suppose to ourselves. So we hear that the upstream is not the problem, it's not the downstream, but there's a demand, the midstream is the issue. And then we point fingers at the government, or we say there's not participation there. But if we then stand back and we say, well, what else can we do as the consumer? What have we not been doing? Is there something which we have missed and which we could be doing? If I can put it that way. Jaco, I apologize for throwing that one right at you. I think you're grappling with that a bit, but I just sometimes say, well, you know, what's the role that I can play or we can play as the consumer in all of this? So Koos, jammer, I'm doing
Yeah.
it that way.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Andres.
Would you like me to
Yes,
get on to
continue,
that?
Jaco.
Yes, please, Jacques,
Thank
if
you
you
very
don't
much.
mind.
So,
We have to be short. We've got like 2 minutes left, and then
exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be very brief. So South Africa sits at a pivotal point in its economic development. You know, it comes from a desire to centrally control the economy and make decisions and build infrastructure and enable development through state-owned entities and these kind of things. I think those days are over. The cupboards are empty. We're sitting with SOEs which are largely overdebted and simply doesn't have the capacity, fiscally or otherwise, to embark on these type of projects. The problem that you have is you now, with this transition, you're now sitting with a reliance on the private sector to actually provide capital for projects which are in the national interest. And that comes with, I mean, if you really think about it, you know, why should industry or the consumer, as you put it now, have to put his balance sheet forward to invest in a railway line or a port infrastructure or a dam for water or a pipeline for gas flow? All right. So it really troubles, it hampers the efficient application of capital for industrial and economic development. But on the other hand, we're now faced with this world where we need to come up with these new fiscal frameworks. All right. And it's not about the concept or the engineering or the cost of projects that are at play. It is how do we structure the transaction. So that, I anticipate, is going to be the burning issue in the next 9 months, particularly around the gas cliff, but other larger projects as well. What the consumer can do, I mean, what industry is typically doing is contributing to this type of solution by, we've all heard about the gas aggregation initiative that industry is following now. Company has been incorporated called Gas Hub. We're in the process of board appointment. And this company will create a platform, a market platform where the demand can be consolidated in order to enable some of these transactions. But it can only bring it so far, all right, as a collective. So in other words, you're defragmenting the market in order to bring the ability about to underwrite some of these infrastructure projects. So I think this is just one way of doing it, but it really, in our view, it is really apparent now that it sits in what is the role of the government and what is that risk? I call it the safety pin in the wagon, all right? A small but critical piece that keeps everything together. And I think that is at a fiscal level what the government should be focusing on. The problem is getting that understanding across, you know, that is our challenge at the moment.
Thank you, Jaco. We've run out of time. There was quite a few interesting questions around what does the coal play in this whole thing. And then, Yuri, we were not getting to your questions there, but there's quite a few questions around the CO2, just not a theoretical exercise. How soon will we get the new emerging technologies going? But we will try and answer that offline in any case. But what I'm hearing is, how do we unlock this whole thing? This could be a very nice topic for a follow-up seminar. Thank you, Wilmien. Okay, we've discussed now quite extensively the issue of the gas cliff and the shortage of gas. But we also know that there's a lot of discussions that we can't move away from coal, and the coal must stay a very important source of energy into the world and into Southern Africa. And I would really want to know what's the view of a panel in this. And maybe, Yuri, I'm going to start at you from your strong chemical and CO2 view around this topic.
Yeah, I mean, coal is obviously the dirtiest of all the fossil fuels, followed by oil and then followed by gas, of course. Any conversion of diesel engines to gas will give you an automatic improvement in environmental releases or reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Cummins Diesel have done a number of tests on their own engines where they converted a diesel engine to run on gas, and they found that it's 30 to 33% cleaner than using diesel as a fuel. So yes, any movement away from coal is a positive movement. But again, a country like South Africa, where it's primarily based on coal as your energy feedstock, as your source of energy, yeah, that it will be difficult to move away from it, and it will be a slow process, and it will require a joint effort by everybody concerned, including the government, of course, to move to a more to a cleaner future, to a hydrogen-based economy.
Koos, you're on mute.
Thank you. Freek, yeah, how do we balance this issue? We've slow out of the blocks with gas and renewables. We still have coal. People still opening up coal mines. Botswana looks like they're very serious about coal to liquids. Your views?
Yeah, there's an interesting other perspective going around. It has been going around for some time. And there was a conference in Stellenbosch a week or two ago where Tony Blair from the UK also was a speaker. And this goes around, yes, we want to move away from coal. We want to move to a cleaner future. Africa actually is a very small contributor to the CO2 emissions worldwide. I think it's below 10% or so. Yuri can help me. So
It's actually as low as 1.4%.
Oh, I thought it was much higher. So why the huge pressure on the African continent to actually get rid of coal and sort of not allow them to grow their economy and those sort of things by investing in coal, but eventually transitioning to gas and renewable power? That will happen. But, you know, really not just go and say we shut down all coal now and no coal developments, nothing. I think the sentiment is switching a bit, and there's more acceptance of using coal in the future a bit and so on further. So in my viewpoint, it's more of a balanced thing. And there are some areas that's really moving nicely. I mean, Yuri mentioned the diesel movement, and that's more from crude oil type things and not from coal, to actually start using that as a diesel replacement fuel, for example. That already will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in South Africa considerably. And, you know, so it's a bit of a balanced approach, I think. I don't think we must just write coal off totally type of thing.
Thank you, Freek. Jaco, I want you also to comment, but also bring the shale gas context in this. Mustn't we rather just push that hard?
Let me make one or two comments on coal, because it's quite topical in the industrial space at the moment. You know, we all understand the move or the economic shift from domestic or Sasol gas to LNG. Certain industries are quite impacted by this and have made the decision that they will go back to coal gasification, period. All right. So at the end of the day, you have some losers in this space, but you also have some winners. There's industries that actually want more gas, even at LNG prices. All right. So it is very sectoral, and one should perhaps guard against making broad statements to say that, you know, we cannot afford LNG, or LNG is too expensive. It's horses for courses at an industrial level and market sectoral level. Now, on the coal side, I mean, you know, can it work? Yes, of course. Sasol, for example, as we had this webinar today, Sasol announced that they will essentially convert Secunda to a big coal to gas plant in order to extend the bridge to 2030. All right. So Sasol has announced this morning that they will give us more gas until 2032. Oh, sorry, until 2030, a 2-year extension, but it's going to be coal. All right. It's going to be coal based. So we are forced in that direction. I fully share the sentiment that, there's this political social view around, we need to decarbonize, etc., etc. But there's a very real, practical, economic world as well that requires us to keep on using carbon fuels. And then you get into these debates around, yes, our coal fleets will come off naturally. No one's going to invest in further coal in the country as the coal fleets come off. So something needs to replace that. Gas and renewables, of course, is what is required, but it's still carbon-based. Shale gas, coming back to the shale gas comment, shale gas, in my opinion, there are more efficient ways to extract gas in and around South Africa than the shale gas process. Personally, I think if you think about the amount of infrastructure that is required to support that operation, you need water, you need roads, you need, significant developments. I would rather take it offshore.
Yes.
For me, it makes more practical sense at a technical and investment level. And then you have the investment risk of having something onshore versus offshore. All right. You have international capital coming in, but they're hesitant to start investing onshore in South Africa for obvious reasons. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. Personally, I think we should focus offshore. All right, that is where, and the gas is there. The gas is there.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a personal view. I think it's 6 of the one, half a dozen of the other. It really is. But what we do need as a country is this $6-7 gas. That will bring down the cost of electricity significantly, particularly if you're thinking about the 18 gigawatts that is being referred to in the IRP. And then, of course, it could considerably contribute towards the reindustrialization of South Africa. Sasol needs that. Industry needs that. If you think about it, I mean, we often refer to this domestic gas potential as this century's coal event. If you go back to the 50s in the previous decade, 40s, 50s, the economy was built on the back of coal energy. I think this, if we play it right, we can build the same industrial capacity on the back of domestic gas. It's very important.
Yeah, like balance of onshore and offshore can play that quite nicely. Thank you. Thank you, Jaco. If you want to go, you're welcome. But
thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jaco.
Yuri, is CO2 storage not just a theoretical exercise, and where is it done successfully? The question could have been early in your presentation because you've showed some of that, but yeah, could you respond?
Yeah, I mean, it has been proven to work, but one has to be realistic about it. The success story that everybody tells you about is the Sleipner carbon capture and storage unit in Norway. It was started in 1996, and it's been running continuously since that. But they managed to store 1 million tons per annum of carbon dioxide in a saline aquifer. Now, 1 million tons per annum sounds like a lot. Now, remember I said earlier that South Africa only contributes 1.4% to the global CO2 emissions. And if we only look at South Africa, the last published figure for overall CO2 emissions from South Africa was 405 million tons per annum. So a 1 million ton storage capacity is not a lot. I mean, there are other successful plants. There's the Snøhvit one, also in Norway, that's 0.7 million, or 700,000 tons per annum. There's Boundary Dam, which is another 1 million tons. The Gorgon one in Australia is the biggest one, So far, it was designed to be able to store 4 million tons per annum, but they've never been able to achieve that. The best they've done is about 2.5, which means that in terms of the overall volume of CO2 produced and what is actually being stored, it is less than a drop in the bucket. It's not the way, or it's not going to be the final answer to everything. It can contribute, and it is more cost effective in areas where you have concentrated streams of CO2. I know that people are trying to do direct air capture of CO2 and try and store that. This is prohibitively expensive. Getting the CO2 in a concentrated form is where most of the cost lies. The underground storage part is around about 20% of the total cost. Getting the CO2 together is 80% of the cost. So if you look at direct air capture, you're talking about up to $600 per ton, which is an astronomical amount. But yes, maybe there are breakthroughs, maybe there are people who can develop methodologies that we can store carbon dioxide in larger quantities, but at the moment it's not the answer to all the problems.
Thank you, Yuri. There's another question from Charles Buys. He said, what is the development horizon for these emerging technologies? And obviously you've listed quite a few, but yes, thank you.
Yeah, in terms of carbon capture and storage, I still see that a lot of development work needs to be done. The good news is in terms of small-scale liquefaction, the technologies are available. In terms of converting methane to hydrogen, the pyrolysis technologies, some of them are very close to actual commercial scale of readiness. There are a number of demonstration units running successfully, and one of the ones with the best results so far probably is the Hazer one in Australia. They've been running for about a year now with their demonstration unit, but it's still relatively small scale. So steam methane reforming and autothermal reforming will still be with us for quite a number of years.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. Thank you to the panel. It was quite an interesting debate, and we actually have got a lot of insight. The issues around how do we really going to progress for gas in South Africa is topical, and how we can unlock that. But while we're still working on the older technologies, we're using older energy sources like coal, but also keep on developing the, call it, new emerging technologies. Thank you to everybody.
Dankie, Koos.
Thanks, Koos. Much
Baie
appreciated.
dankie almal.
You.
Thank you from my side for each and every one of you who have been attending. I hope that you sat on the front of your seat as I did to hear all of that. Thank you, Koos, for facilitating the Q&A. But for all our speakers and all the effort that you've put in and to come and share your wisdom with us. A call out for investors, a call out. We have a bunch of engineers sitting and waiting, ready with all the solutions to solve this problem, but it sounds to me we need investment. We need more groups of people talking and working together, and let's see how we can facilitate that and take that forward. Your participation keep us going to sharing our words and thoughts with you. So again, thank you. I hope to see you at the next webinar on the 8th of May. With that, goodbye. We going to end the event, but the speakers can stay a few minutes longer. Thank you.